The massive dome of compressed hay stood 30 feet high in the middle of Dakota Weiss's pasture, its curved walls gleaming golden under the Minnesota sun. Every neighbor who drove past slowed their pickup trucks to stare at the bizarre structure, some pulling out phones to capture what looked like an oversized beaver lodge made entirely of straw. The local coffee shop buzzed with whispered theories about the widowed rancher's mental state, while hardware store clerks exchanged knowing glances when customers asked if Dakota had finally lost his mind. But none of them understood the intricate ventilation system hidden within those compressed walls, or noticed the steel reinforcements barely visible beneath the organic exterior. Most importantly, none of them realized that winter was coming earlier than predicted. Dakota adjusted his worn Carhartt jacket as he walked around the peculiar structure, checking the almost invisible air vents he had carefully positioned every 8 feet around the dome's circumference. 3 months of backbreaking labor had gone into compressing over 200 bales of premium alfalfa into this revolutionary design, each layer strategically placed to create maximum insulation while maintaining structural integrity. His late wife Sarah would have called him crazy too, but she also would have trusted his engineering instincts that had kept their cattle operation profitable for 15 years. The ridicule from neighboring ranchers stung more than Dakota cared to admit. Tom Bradley from the adjacent spread had actually driven onto his property yesterday, demanding to know what kind of eyesore was ruining their property values. Elena Cross, the local veterinarian, had been more diplomatic during her monthly herd check, but Dakota caught her photographing the structure when she thought he wasn't looking. Even her 12-year-old son Finn had asked pointed questions about whether Mr. Weiss was building some kind of fort. Traditional Minnesota cattlemen relied on conventional barns and metal shelters that required expensive heating systems during brutal winter months. Dakota's research into ancient Inuit construction methods had revealed how properly designed dome structures could maintain internal temperatures through body heat alone. But explaining thermal dynamics to stubborn ranchers was like teaching calculus to his Holstein bulls. The compressed hay walls would provide insulation superior to modern buildings, while the dome shape would distribute wind loads that regularly collapsed rectangular structures. His smartphone weather app showed the first major storm system approaching faster than meteorologists had predicted. The National Weather Service had issued winter storm watches for the entire region, warning of potentially historic snowfall amounts and dangerous wind speeds. Dakota's neighbors were still preparing their heated barns and hoping their backup generators would survive another season. But as he examined the final construction details of his hay igloo, Dakota realized he had overlooked one critical factor that would determine whether his innovation saved lives or became his ultimate humiliation. The test would come sooner than anyone expected. The forgotten factor hit Dakota like a physical blow as he stared at his creation. Ventilation was perfect, insulation was superior, structural integrity was sound. But he had never tested the entry system under emergency conditions. The single opening he had designed was barely wide enough for cattle to enter single file, and in a panic situation, animals would trample each other trying to reach safety. His revolutionary shelter could become a death trap if frightened livestock stampeded toward the narrow entrance during a blizzard. Elena Cross drove up the gravel road in her veterinary truck, emergency lights flashing as she responded to a call about a sick heifer in Dakota's north pasture. She parked near the peculiar hay structure and stepped out, her medical bag in one hand, and her phone already dialing the rancher's number. Finn had begged to come along on this emergency call, claiming he needed to interview local farmers for a school project about innovative agriculture, but Elena suspected her curious son simply wanted another look at the mysterious dome. "Dakota, your heifer's showing signs of respiratory distress," Elena called out as she approached the structure where he stood motionless. "We need to get her isolated and start treatment immediately." She noticed his pale complexion and realized something beyond veterinary emergencies was troubling him. "What's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost." Dakota gestured helplessly at the hay igloo. "I spent 3 months building the perfect winter shelter and forgot the most basic element of emergency design. Look at that entrance, Elena. It's designed for calm, organized movement, not panic." He kicked at the frozen ground, his breath forming white clouds in the increasingly cold air. "If animals rush this thing during a storm, they'll crush each other trying to get inside." Finn emerged from behind the veterinary truck, his smartphone already recording video of the strange structure. "Mom, this thing is incredible. I've been researching igloo construction online, and Mr. Weiss basically built a giant version using agricultural materials instead of ice blocks. The boy walked closer to examine the compressed hay walls, running his hands along the smooth surface. But why is there only one door? Wouldn't you want multiple exits in case of fire or something? Elena's professional mind immediately grasped the safety implications. Emergency exits weren't just building code requirements for human structures. They were life-saving necessities for livestock facilities. A single entry point created dangerous bottlenecks during crisis situations, especially when dealing with panicked animals that could weigh over 1,000 pounds each. Modern barn design always included multiple access points to prevent exactly this type of potentially fatal scenario. The weather radio in Dakota's truck crackled to life with an updated forecast. Winter storm warning now in effect for southeastern Minnesota. Heavy snow beginning tonight with accumulations of 18 to 24 inches possible. Wind gusts up to 60 miles per hour. Livestock owners should ensure animals have adequate shelter. Dakota stared at his revolutionary hay igloo, then at the dark clouds gathering on the horizon. He had 48 hours to solve an engineering problem that could determine whether his innovation became a lifesaver or a burial mound. But as Elena finished examining the sick heifer, she made an observation that would change everything. Elena finished her examination of the sick heifer and turned to Dakota with an expression of sudden realization. Wait a minute. You're thinking about this all wrong. Animals don't behave like humans in emergency situations. They follow the herd leader, and cattle naturally form single-file lines when moving through narrow spaces. The problem isn't the entrance width, it's the approach angle. She gestured toward the structure's opening. If you create a funnel-shaped pathway leading to the entrance, the animals will naturally organize themselves instead of bunching up and panicking. Dakota felt hope surge through his chest as he studied Elena's suggestion. She was absolutely right. His experience with cattle handling had taught him that livestock moved calmly through properly designed chutes and pathways, even during stressful situations. The solution wasn't rebuilding the entrance. It was creating a guidance system that worked with natural cattle behavior instead of against it. He had portable panels in his equipment barn that could form temporary corridors leading directly into the hay igloo. Mom's brilliant with animal psychology, Finn added, still filming with his phone. She figured out how to get Mr. Henderson's stubborn bulls to cooperate just by changing the angle of his loading chute. The boy paused his recording and looked thoughtfully at the structure. But what happens if the storm knocks down those panels? Wouldn't they just blow away in 60-mile-per-hour winds? Tom Bradley's diesel truck roared up the driveway, followed by two other neighboring ranchers who had apparently come to gawk at what they considered Dakota's folly. The three men climbed out of their vehicles and approached the group with expressions of barely concealed amusement. Tom shook his head slowly as he examined the hay dome. Weiss, I've seen some crazy ideas in 30 years of ranching, but this takes the prize. You spent 3 months building a giant hamster wheel for your cattle. It's not a hamster wheel, it's revolutionary insulation technology, Dakota replied, his voice tight with frustration. This structure will maintain internal temperature through thermal mass and body heat, eliminating heating costs completely. He gestured toward the dome's curved walls. The compressed hay provides better insulation than modern foam boards, and the dome shape distributes wind loads that collapse rectangular buildings. The second rancher, Carl Hutchins, laughed outright. Revolutionary? Son, we've been keeping cattle alive in Minnesota winters for over a century using proven methods. Heated barns, windbreaks, and common sense. What happens when that thing catches fire? Compressed hay burns like a bomb. Carl's criticism struck a nerve that Dakota hadn't considered during his months of construction planning. Elena's eyes widened as she processed Carl's warning. Hay fires were a constant threat on working ranches, and compressed bales burned with devastating intensity once ignited. A single spark from lightning, electrical malfunction, or even spontaneous combustion could turn Dakota's innovative shelter into a massive funeral pyre. The veterinarian realized that Dakota's engineering marvel had a potentially fatal flaw that could destroy everything he was trying to protect. But as the first snowflakes began falling from the darkening sky, Dakota noticed something about the hay igloo that none of his critics had observed. Dakota pointed to the barely visible metal strips embedded throughout the compressed hay walls. Fire suppression system. I installed a network of perforated copper tubing connected to my well pump. One flip of a switch floods the entire structure with water in under 30 seconds. He walked closer to show them the concealed nozzles positioned every few feet along the dome's interior curve. The hay is treated with flame retardant, and the moisture content is carefully controlled to prevent spontaneous combustion while maintaining insulation properties. Tom Bradley's smug expression faltered as he realized Dakota had anticipated the fire risk that seemed so obvious to experienced ranchers. Carl Hutchins stepped closer to examine the hidden copper piping, his earlier mockery replaced by grudging professional curiosity. Even the third rancher, who had remained silent until now, began walking around the structure with new respect for its engineering complexity. Elena felt a surge of admiration for Dakota's thorough planning, but her veterinary training made her focus on practical concerns. What about drainage? If you flood the structure to prevent fire, where does all that water go? Standing water creates perfect conditions for bacterial growth and hoof rot. She gestured toward the frozen ground around the dome, especially if temperatures drop below freezing while the floor is still wet. Finn continued recording with his phone, narrating his observations like a nature documentary. This is incredible. Mr. Weiss basically built a giant terrarium with its own climate control system. The copper tubes aren't just for fire suppression. They're probably for temperature regulation too. The boys' enthusiasm was infectious, and even the skeptical ranchers began asking detailed questions about construction methods and material costs. Dakota felt vindicated as he explained the integrated drainage system that channeled water through gravel beds beneath the hay floor. Every criticism his neighbors raised had been anticipated and addressed during months of careful planning. The structure represented 15 years of accumulated knowledge about cattle behavior, Minnesota weather patterns, and agricultural engineering principles that most ranchers never bothered to study. The snowfall intensified dramatically as they talked, transforming from scattered flakes into a steady curtain of white that reduced visibility to less than 50 yards. Tom Bradley checked his phone and frowned at the updated weather forecast. Guys, this storm is tracking faster and stronger than predicted. They're now calling for 30 inches of snow with hurricane-force winds. My generator barely kept up during last February's blizzard, and this is supposed to be twice as bad. Carl Hutchins looked genuinely worried as he climbed back into his truck. I need to get home and move my herd into the heated barn before this gets worse. Dakota, your contraption better work, because if those winds hit 60 miles per hour, half the conventional shelters in this county are going down. He paused before closing his truck door. And if your cattle freeze to death in that thing, Elena's going to have a lot of explaining to do to the state agricultural inspector. Elena realized with growing alarm that Dakota's hay igloo was about to face its ultimate test under conditions more severe than anyone had anticipated. But as she prepared to leave with Finn, her son made an observation that changed everything they thought they knew about the approaching storm. Finn stopped recording and stared at his phone screen with wide eyes. Mom, look at this radar image. The storm isn't just bigger than predicted. It's changed direction completely. It's going to hit us head-on instead of passing to the south. He showed Elena the weather app that displayed a massive spiral of green and red covering most of Minnesota and Wisconsin. We're going to be in the center of this thing for at least 18 hours. Elena felt her stomach drop as she processed the implications. A direct hit meant sustained winds instead of brief gusts, and temperatures that could plummet to life-threatening levels for extended periods. Her own horses were in a conventional barn that relied on electric heating, and power outages during severe storms were practically guaranteed in their rural area. If the electricity failed during sub-zero temperatures, animals could freeze to death within hours. Dakota's cattle began showing signs of agitation as barometric pressure dropped rapidly. The herd instinctively moved closer together, their breath creating thick clouds of vapor in the increasingly frigid air. Traditional ranching wisdom called for getting livestock into heated shelters immediately, but Dakota made a decision that shocked everyone present. He opened the gate to the hay igloo and began calmly walking his cattle toward the entrance instead of driving them to his conventional barn. "Are you insane?" Tom Bradley shouted over the rising wind. "Get those animals into a real shelter with backup heating before they freeze solid." He watched in disbelief as Dakota's Holstein cattle filed obediently through the narrow entrance, following their familiar routine, despite the unusual destination. That hay pile might work for a mild winter day, but not during a historic blizzard. Elena found herself torn between professional skepticism and growing curiosity about Dakota's confidence in his creation. She had spent years treating livestock injuries caused by inadequate winter shelter, and her veterinary oath required her to speak up if animals were in danger. But Dakota's cattle appeared calm and organized as they entered the dome, showing none of the panic behavior she typically observed during severe weather events. The first cattle to enter the hay igloo immediately sought out the warmest spots along the curved walls, their body heat beginning to raise the internal temperature exactly as Dakota had calculated. The compressed hay walls started functioning like a massive insulation system, trapping warm air while blocking the brutal wind that now howled across the exposed pasture at 40 miles per hour. Finn continued documenting the process with his phone, but his excitement turned to concern as he noticed something alarming about the storm's progression. "Mom, the temperature is dropping faster than the weather service predicted. It's already 15 degrees and falling. If this keeps up, we're looking at -20 within a few hours." Elena realized they were witnessing either a revolutionary breakthrough in livestock protection or a disaster in the making. But as the full fury of the blizzard struck Dakota's property, she discovered that the hay igloo held a secret that would determine not just the survival of his cattle, but the fate of everyone caught in the storm's path. The secret Elena discovered was heat retention beyond anything conventional shelters could achieve. Within 2 hours after the cattle entered the hay igloo, internal temperature had risen to 45 degrees despite outside conditions dropping to -15 with howling winds. The compressed hay walls absorbed and held body heat from 43 Holstein cattle, creating a microclimate that defied the deadly blizzard raging outside. Dakota's calculations had been conservative. The structure was performing better than his most optimistic projections. Elena's phone rang with an emergency call that made her blood run cold. "Dr. Cross, this is Sheriff Martinez. We have a situation developing on County Road 7. Multiple vehicles are stranded in whiteout conditions, including a family with 2 small children. The snowplows can't get through, and we're looking at temperatures dropping to -30 before dawn. Do you know of any emergency shelters in that area?" Elena realized immediately that Dakota's property was the closest refuge to the stranded motorists. County Road 7 ran directly past his ranch, and the hay igloo was positioned less than 200 yards from the roadway. "Sheriff, there might be an option, but it's unconventional. Dakota Weiss has a livestock shelter that could accommodate people temporarily." She hesitated, knowing how absurd it sounded to suggest housing humans with cattle during a life-threatening emergency. Dakota overheard the conversation and made an immediate decision that surprised everyone. "Tell the sheriff to guide those people here. The igloo has enough space and heat capacity for humans and livestock together. It's not comfortable, but it will keep them alive." He began calculating load capacity in his head, realizing that additional human body heat would actually improve conditions for everyone inside the structure. Finn's eyes widened with excitement despite the serious situation. "This is incredible. Mr. Weiss built something that can save people, not just animals. It's like a real-life survival shelter that nobody understood until right now." He continued recording as Dakota prepared the hay igloo for human refugees, clearing pathways and organizing space to accommodate desperate families. The first stranded vehicle arrived 20 minutes later, guided by sheriff's deputies through the blinding snow. A young couple emerged from their disabled car carrying twin toddlers bundled in every piece of clothing they could find. The woman stared in disbelief at the massive hay dome. "You want us to go inside that thing with cows? Are you serious?" Her husband looked equally skeptical until Dakota explained how the structure worked. "Ma'am, that hay igloo is currently maintaining 45 degrees internal temperature while it's -20 outside. Your children will be warm, dry, and safe until the storm passes and rescue crews can reach us." Dakota's calm confidence was reassuring, but the family remained hesitant about sharing shelter with livestock during a historic blizzard. Elena checked the toddlers quickly and confirmed they were showing early signs of hypothermia. Their lips had a blue tinge, and their shivering was becoming uncontrollable despite heavy winter clothing. Medical training told her they needed immediate warming or faced serious danger within the next hour, but as more headlights appeared through the snow, she realized this was only the beginning of a much larger emergency. 3 more vehicles struggled through the storm over the next hour, their occupants desperate for shelter as temperatures plummeted to -28 degrees. An elderly couple from a stranded medical transport van joined 2 teenagers whose car had slid off the icy road and a traveling salesman whose truck had broken down completely. Dakota organized the refugees efficiently, positioning them along the warmest sections of the hay walls, where radiant heat from the cattle provided maximum comfort. The hay igloo now housed his herd of 43 Holsteins, 2 adults, 4 children, 3 elderly individuals, and 2 teenagers in a space that defied every conventional wisdom about emergency shelter. Internal temperature stabilized at 52 degrees as human and animal body heat combined to create a survival ecosystem that kept everyone safe despite hurricane-force winds battering the structure outside. The compressed hay walls dampened sound, creating an almost peaceful environment while the storm raged with deadly intensity beyond their protective dome. Elena moved between the refugees, checking for hypothermia symptoms and ensuring everyone remained stable throughout the long night. The toddlers had recovered quickly in the warm environment, playing quietly while their parents marveled at the unconventional but effective shelter. Finn documented everything with his phone, creating a real-time record of how Dakota's ridiculed innovation had transformed into a genuine lifesaver for 12 human beings. Sheriff Martinez radioed regular updates about deteriorating conditions throughout the county. Dr. Cross, we have 17 vehicles stranded on various roads, but your location is the only functioning emergency shelter. 3 conventional heated barns have lost power, and the community center's generator failed an hour ago. How many more people can that hay structure accommodate safely? Dakota quickly calculated the heat production, oxygen consumption, and spatial requirements. Sheriff, we could handle maybe 15 more people maximum before carbon dioxide buildup becomes dangerous. But we'd need to monitor air quality closely and possibly crack the entrance for ventilation if overcrowding becomes critical. He had never imagined his agricultural innovation would become the primary emergency shelter for an entire rural community. The traveling salesman, initially horrified by the prospect of sharing space with cattle, became Dakota's most vocal supporter as he experienced the structure's effectiveness firsthand. This thing is incredible. I've got clients in the construction industry who would pay millions to understand how this thermal mass system works. You've accidentally invented the most efficient emergency shelter I've ever seen. His enthusiasm was infectious among the other refugees. As dawn approached, the storm continued with undiminished fury, but everyone inside Dakota's hay igloo remained warm, safe, and increasingly amazed by their unconventional sanctuary. The structure that neighbors had mocked as a fool's errand had become the difference between life and death for 12 people during Minnesota's worst blizzard in recorded history. But the true test of Dakota's innovation was yet to come. The blizzard finally broke after 18 hours of devastating winds and record snowfall that left 3 feet of snow across southeastern Minnesota. Emergency crews reached Dakota's ranch by noon, finding 12 grateful survivors and 43 healthy cattle emerging from the hay igloo into brilliant sunshine that reflected off pristine white drifts. The structure had maintained internal temperatures above 50 degrees throughout the entire storm, while conventional heated barns across the county had failed when power lines collapsed under ice and wind. Sheriff Martinez coordinated the rescue operation with growing amazement as he witnessed the aftermath of Dakota's innovation. Weiss, I've been in emergency management for 20 years, and I've never seen anything like this. Your shelter saved more lives last night than our entire county emergency system. The sheriff's radio crackled with reports of livestock losses at neighboring ranches where traditional shelters had proven inadequate against the historic storm. Tom Bradley arrived with a snowplow to help clear access roads, his earlier mockery replaced by genuine respect and embarrassment. Dakota, I owe you an apology. When I called your igloo a hamster wheel, I was thinking like an old-school rancher instead of an engineer. This thing is revolutionary. He examined the structure's exterior, noting how the dome shape had shed snow and wind without any structural damage whatsoever. Elena completed medical checkups on all the storm refugees, confirming that everyone had survived the ordeal in excellent health, despite spending nearly a day in sub-zero conditions. The traveling salesman had already begun making phone calls to agricultural universities and engineering firms about Dakota's thermal mass innovation. Dr. Cross, this man has accidentally solved emergency shelter design for disaster response situations. The implications go far beyond cattle ranching. Finn uploaded his documentary footage to social media platforms, where it immediately went viral under hashtags about innovative farming and emergency survival. Within hours, agricultural engineers, disaster response specialists, and university researchers were requesting permission to study Dakota's hay igloo design. The structure that had been ridiculed as a waste of time and materials was now being hailed as a breakthrough in sustainable emergency architecture. Dakota stood beside his creation as the last of the rescued families departed, feeling a mixture of vindication and profound satisfaction. His late wife, Sarah, would have been proud to see how months of patient engineering had saved lives during Minnesota's worst natural disaster in recorded history. The compressed hay walls had performed exactly as calculated, proving that innovation often emerged from combining traditional materials with modern engineering principles. The local news crew that arrived to document the rescue operation dubbed Dakota's Shelter the Hay Igloo that saved Minnesota, a title that would stick as agricultural colleges across the Midwest began developing curriculum around his thermal mass design. Dakota Weiss had transformed from neighborhood eccentric to recognized innovator, and his revolutionary shelter would influence emergency architecture for generations to come. If you enjoyed this story, click the video on your screen now to watch another unforgettable tale where courage and innovation collide in ways you never expected. Don't forget to subscribe and consider a super chat to help us keep bringing you more stories like these. Your support means everything to us.